Hi, this is Craig Urquhart, and welcome to Berlin Conversations. Today, my guest, I'm honored to have as my guest, Zenaida Desaubry. She is a cultural consultant for international cultural activities, and I'm very happy to have her here. She's a good friend, she's a neighbor, which is wonderful here in Berlin, and she's got a very interesting story to share. First of all, how did you end up in Berlin? That's my first question I ask everybody. So.
Well, as a matter of fact, now it's already been 10 years. I mean, literally, time has flown. But after about 30 years in Munich, I decided enough is enough and time for a change. And in casting about, I suddenly realized that many of my friends had moved to Berlin. So I came up here and looked around, and within 2 weeks, I had an apartment. In fact, just around the corner from here.
Yeah, we're neighbors.
Yeah.
It's
yes,
wonderful.
Exactly. And quite honestly, I've never looked back. I think Berlin is a wonderfully dynamic city. Munich was great too.
Munich's a great town too.
It's a wonderful town. I don't regret a single minute that I spent there. But somehow Berlin has a different vibe and a different fluidum, and there's more going on. It's rougher around the edges. Mm-hmm. And somehow it's more stimulating.
And the cultural life here is just...
The cultural life here, I mean, what other capital of the world has 3 opera houses,
right.
Several, I lose count, 6 or 7 or 8 major orchestras, right. Symphony incredible. Orchestras, amazing number of smaller ensembles, and choral ensembles, you know, right. I mean, one could spend one's evenings going out all the time.
And so many artists have moved here, so many musicians, so many musicians, painters,
exactly.
Filmmakers. It's just really an exciting place to be.
It's amazing. I mean, you probably are a member also of, on Facebook, there's Berlin Opera Singers. Mm-hmm. And I think it has 12,000 members. Okay, not all of them live in Berlin, right. But nonetheless, they have some sort of association.
Yeah.
And it's extremely active, that particular page.
Yeah. So you're now a consultant for international cultural activities, and that's because you've had your hand in so many interesting projects over the years, and
yes.
You've worked with so many interesting people.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, you worked with Loren Maazel, the great maestro.
I did. Yes, I did. While he was General Music Director, GMD, as they call him here, for the Bavarian Radio Symphony Orchestra, yes. In the middle 90s, and that was also the time when he was associated with the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, and worked very much we toured with him with the Philharmonia London to Japan several times. So yes, I managed him there, and then prior to that, I had my own agency for opera singers, and prior to that, I managed Jean-Pierre Ponel.
I didn't know that. That's
yes,
really
exactly, and that was when the time that was from 1980 basically until he died in 1988, and I got to know him while I was in San Francisco at the San Francisco Opera, still working with the now legendary impresario Kurt Herbert Adler. Mm-hmm. And he was, so to say, the person who introduced me to opera per se. But my love for opera goes way back to when I was born in Argentina, and my first opera performance that I visited along with my parents, they took me along, was Tannhäuser at the Teatro Colón at the age of 7.
Oh, that's quite a way to put your foot in the water.
Well, let me put it this way. At that time, you know, as an only child, babysitters were not on the, you know, not a matter of. They didn't exist. So basically, they took me along to wherever they went, and they happened to, you know. We went to very many productions and performances. I remember Montserrat Caballé in Forza del Destino. I mean, this is you know, still to this day one of those highlights where you suddenly think, how can a human voice sound like this?
She was such a wonderful artist.
Wonderful artist,
and
exactly.
quite a character.
And quite a character, exactly. And then I actually met her personally, of course, when she was at the San Francisco Opera. And when she, for example, and Pavarotti did a Tosca conducted by... no, it was not conducted by Kurt Herbert Adler, but it was a performance by Ponel. and many, many anecdotes, of course,
Yeah.
during that time. Yes.
I can just imagine.
Yes.
So you went from Argentina and
Argentina, then to the United States. Then I sort of stayed there, came over to, of course, to Europe several times, and traveled, did the grand tour in more ways than one. But then ended up again in the United States, also because at that time I was married, and ended up San Francisco Opera. And then Ponell came along, and he said, well, if I would accept his to manage him, it would be more convenient to live in Europe. And so, since he was also in Munich, and Munich I knew very well, I had relatives there, I said, no brainer, I'll move to Munich. And that was, in fact, the beginning of living in Europe.
And you've worked on some very, very interesting projects. I know of one that you did was it Beijing?
In Beijing, yes, exactly.
Yes,
the Turandot in the Forbidden City, with Zubin Mehta conducting and Zhang Yimou, who at that time was not at all the great stage director that he is now, film director that he is now. Yes, it was done in the first time that such a huge opera production was done within the, I call it the outer walls of the Forbidden City. And we had 9 performances with 45,000 visitors approximately altogether in those 9 performances. And that was fantastic. That was really a very triple cast.
Was that how much later than the Cultural Revolution?
It was 97, 98. So that was already, a good almost 20 years thereafter. But nonetheless, this was really also the beginning, I would say, of the interest of the Chinese in classical music. Yes, Isaac Stern had been there. Yes, Pavarotti had been there. Karajan had been there. But this massive surge of turning to a classical music as we have it today had not yet started. In comparison, I would say Japan, in its love of Western classical music and support of classical music, they're 20 years. They have
much longer.
Much longer. I'm sure you know that also with Bernstein. He'd been all over the place also.
Right, but the infrastructure wasn't really there in China when you went.
No, not at all.
So you really had to put it together.
This was way before the NCPAA. I mean, the egg or anything like that.
Yeah.
And I would say that shortly thereafter, and then in fact, as a result of that, a few years later, in 2004, 2005, I was called to Hangzhou again, which is a wonderful city, 135 kilometers southwest of Shanghai. And I was, so to say, the first intendant of an opera house that they put there.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Carlos Ott designed, who also did the Bastille in Paris and so forth. So that was an interesting interlude, also working there. Until, in fact, the Chinese felt that they had been trained well enough by my team and I, and had said, thank you, now we can run it ourselves.
Well, that's a real testament to your
It
management.
is. And then I returned, and I hadn't been here for 2 weeks, and Helga Schmidt from the Valencia New Opera House called me and said, would you like to come down here and help me set this up? And so I did that.
I worked on a project with Helga.
Yes.
Yes. West Side Story and La Scala.
Exactly.
Right,
exactly. Yes. Well, that was the very.
But Valencia, that was a very exciting time.
That was a very exciting time.
It still is an exciting art center.
It's wonderful. It's a wonderful art center, and it has. It's finding its place, I think, also within the context of the Madrid, Barcelona, of course, Valencia, and Sevilla. I mean, I would say that those are the 4 big centers, at least for Bilbao, also for the shall we say, vocal arts in Spain.
Yeah, I worked on Operalia once in Madrid.
Exactly.
That
Yes,
was
that
interesting
was
time
fun.
too.
Yeah,
it was fun. So, what else? You've worked with some interesting personalities. Are there any that stood out in your life besides Mazel and Ponell?
Well, everybody says, oh, these stars and everything, that they're so difficult and whatever else, and how could you do that? And I'm sure that you found this also. They themselves, the artists themselves, expect the best of themselves. They want to, they give 150%. And so they expect their inner circle of people to also give 150% and make sure that basically they live up to each other's expectations. And therefore, as knowing that makes it a lot simpler. And I know that both Ponell and Mazel, I think I can say that without any doubt, they couldn't stand stupidity. Yes, a mistake is a mistake, absolutely, acknowledge it, move on. But basic stupidity, this was something that they just couldn't take. And so therefore, it was my job also, and I'm sure that, you also, it was to keep that things out of the way and make it easier for them to sail their extremely complex itineraries in life and schedules and so forth.
Yes, I know.
You know exactly.
I don't think many people understand how hard these people like Mazel and Ponell and Bernstein and opera singers, how hard they work.
Absolutely. I mean, it is basically the performance on stage that evening, that's really an easy thing.
That's the icing on the cake.
That's the icing on the cake. But everything that goes on behind the scenes, the getting a baton, suddenly making sure that it's the right baton,
right,
and or getting whatever, it's just the logistics also of schedules that have concerts, particularly of a tour, that have concerts taking place every 2 days you're somewhere else. Yeah. Every day you're somewhere else.
Sometimes it's every day.
Yes, and with Ponell it was then a matter also of productions. There you had, chunks of time, 3 weeks here, 4 weeks there. But at the same time also you had an assistant taking another production somewhere else. I remember in Salzburg, he was there, this was 81 when he did Tristan with Barenboim. And so it was Salzburg and Bayreuth. And then there were 2 other productions that were being held in somewhere else. So, there were many, many evenings that we spent 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. It just had to be. And that was not at all a matter of, it was just the way it was.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm sure that when it's no news to you when I tell you that prior to now everything is easy, Wi-Fi, etc.
Oh, we didn't have
it. I was traveling this was with Mazel, and when we went all over the place, I had my little bag of 21 different to put in the socket.
Oh, those adapters.
Adapters,
yeah, right.
Exactly. Because I never knew what was, and we did not stay in any hostels or 3-star hotels. No, we stayed in very good places. But nonetheless, you never knew what you would encounter.
You never know, yeah.
You never know.
And I don't know how we did it back then.
Oh, we did.
Yeah, we just did it. We didn't have cell phones, and fax was really very high tech back then.
Absolutely. I still remember ticker tape in San Francisco at the San Francisco Opera. But now, of course, having our iPhones and whatever.
I remember the first summer of the Schleswig-Holstein Music Festival. Yeah. How did we do those logistics? Get the drivers there on time and everything. And now that everything's done by cell phone and text, and it's much easier.
Much easier.
Oh my gosh! Yes, it was amazing.
Anyway.
So
now here we are in Berlin.
Yeah. And so you're doing some very interesting thing with opera singers now. Continue to work with opera singers.
I'm continuing to work with opera singers. I don't have my own agency because, in fact, I've noticed also that the landscape has changed, has shifted. But I'm working with young opera singers, and I'm basically trying to teach them the business of singing and the importance of knowing how to develop yourself, your unique position, your unique selling position, as it were, your USP, and not trying to sound like everybody else. I leave repertoire and technique to somebody else, but I think it's very important. I see many of the graduates nowadays of music schools, universities, conservatories. They come out and basically they have no idea. No, so how am I now going to navigate the very opaque, I would say, process of auditions and so forth. I mean, it's not straightforward. It's not you inscribe yourself and whatever else. You really have to try. And particularly young singers coming out in their first year after university, they sometimes send out hundreds of letters to artistic directors or agents or whatever, and they don't even receive an answer.
Yeah, well,
you know, as we know. And we know. So how do you get somebody's attention? What is the way to go? And nowadays it seems to be more and more prevalent that taking part in competitions is one way to get draw attention. And even I always say it's wonderful if you win a prize, first, second, third prize, great. But the important thing is to make it to the final cut. For example, I've been working now with the Neue Stimmen Bertelsmann, and going there not necessarily for the finals, but for the quarterfinals, when I can still hear everybody. And that's also where all the artistic directors and the agents will most likely be. It's not yet with orchestra, but you can tell, you can tell, is this person, the potential of the person. And whether then in the end they win a prize or not doesn't matter. It doesn't necessarily matter that much, but it's one way of getting for
to be seen and heard.
To be seen and heard, exactly, by the decision makers. And that, and of course then, having a good website presence.
Right, of course.
Having professional looking repertoire sheets and a website and so forth. Again, it doesn't have to be expensive, but you have to have your own space.
Do you try and coach them in creating their own identity?
That too, yes, yes,
Because
and particularly not in sounding like everybody else.
And did you help them prepare for auditions, in the sense that I know a lot of American singers come to Europe and audition, and they don't do very well because the audition requirements here in Germany, for instance, are very different than they are in the United States, because the opera houses here aren't looking necessarily for fully formed singers when they're young. They don't want them to come and sing Wagner and Strauss. They want them to come and sing Mozart and Handel or whatever little, house repertoire. Am I correct about that?
Yes, by and large, absolutely, and particularly also because many of the artistic directors are also looking for new people to put in their young artist programs. I mean, this is something also, a development that has taken place, I would say, in the last 10 years. Practically every opera house now has a young artist program.
Can you explain what a young artist program is?
It's basically a place where beginners start, and they get a small fee, not necessarily very much, but they do get the opportunity of taking part in a production, usually in the comprimario, in the smaller roles, and being as a shall we say, also as a built-in backup. In other words, they learn the roles, and in case of need, if somebody actually has to cancel, then they can jump in. But they also have the opportunity very much of working with the full-time pianists and coaches of the opera houses.
Oh, that's a real advantage.
And learn the repertoire, learn the system, be part of the entire running, day-to-day operations of an opera house. Learn how to be a good team player, which is extremely important. And so this is one way of going about also getting your foot in the door is once, and usually these contracts are then for one season, maybe 2 seasons, and then they can go on to a next one. But it's an excellent way of finding yourself too, and proving yourself. And if that doesn't necessarily work, then of course there's always, I find that choral work, being a member of the chorus, is absolutely no shame. And I think I would wish that more young people would turn to chorus work, because especially here in Europe, there are so many wonderful choral entities, choral choruses, and either professional or semi-professional, and doing great work. Really, I mean, particularly here in Berlin, we have excellent choruses.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And that's interesting. I don't think most people would think that that's a
No,
way.
and the thing is that they, again, I mean, nowadays, particularly being a member of the chorus in an opera house, I mean, you've got it made, because you have the security of a full-time position and paycheck, and basically you get to move around on stage. I mean, it's if you look at any of our performances here, they are fully in the, they don't just stand around. Oh no, on the contrary,
No,
you have to sing and dance and do whatever else.
No,
it's like
the chorus at the Komische Oper here in
Komische
Berlin.
Oper, for
oh
example,
my God, they
yes.
work really hard.
They do, and I think they enjoy it too.
They
yes.
seem to, yes. That's maybe why I enjoy the productions
Exactly.
so much. Yeah. And that's all very exciting. So what other kind of projects do you work on?
Well, the other project actually that I'm currently working on and that I hope to have up within the next couple of months is something called bravo.berlin. Not .com or .de, but bravo.berlin. And my little logo has 5 little stars on top.
Okay.
So it's everything that makes Berlin a 5-star place.
So we'll make sure your logo's up.
Yes.
Okay.
And particularly also because I've noticed, yes, there are many blogs about Berlin and so forth, but this one I do want to concentrate on opera, classical music, art, architecture, photography,
Yeah, the same, similar. Yeah.
Similar, exactly. And there's so many interesting things going on.
But are you talking more about personalities, or you're talking more about the events?
Events and also tours. In other words, making sure I have a whole team of people interested and also certified tour guides who will personally guide you where you want to go. We're not talking group tours. We're not talking the beer guzzling kind.
Yeah.
No, we're talking about specific. If you are interested in finding out, for example, there's so much Jewish heritage going. Here the what do you call the stumbling stones?
Yes.
And I had in fact a couple from New York last year, and I did some research for them, and was able to actually guide them to the place, to the house, and show them the stumbling stones. And we had a little ceremony and so forth.
Where their family is from?
Yes, and
yeah.
this was very meaningful to them. And I
Yeah.
suddenly realized, wow, this is also a way of them reconnecting with their own history.
That's very interesting. I
Yes.
mean, you told me about. I didn't know. We live in Charlottenburg,
Yes.
and there's a whole exhib about the history of this neighborhood.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
There's a whole museum and everything, and also there are many artists who have, who've been here and who've worked here. Ferruccio Busoni, Billy Wilder.
Well, they're all in Victoria Luisa Platz.
Victoria Luisa Platz, exactly.
The Von Bülows.
The Von Bülows,
yes.
exactly, and then the
Ferd Fandler was on Nollendorf Platz.
Exactly, so we have an incredible amount of history. And let's face it, Cabaret, the movie with Liza Minnelli, and it was filmed right, literally not 200 meters from here, partly.
Where was it filmed?
Sally Bowles, when she
Yeah,
screams
yes,
under
yeah.
it was just right.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
I'll have to take a look at it again. Because I used to live in Nollendorf Platz,
Yeah.
where Christopher Isherwood lived.
Yes, exactly.
I lived right across the street from where
Yeah.
he lived. And that was the neighborhood
Yeah.
where a lot of it took place. But they filmed it here. Interesting, yeah. Yeah, no, Berlin has got so much history. And it's not all pretty, but
It's not all pretty, and I can't necessarily say that Berlin as a city is. I don't necessarily think it's a beautiful city. It has beautiful spots per se, but it's not necessarily. It could use several $billion, pounds, whatever, in infrastructure improvement. But nonetheless, it still has an edge to it.
As you said, it's a little rough on the edges,
Yeah.
and I rather like that myself.
I do too.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Because I don't know, it just makes it more interesting, and it attracts interesting people.
Much more so, yes.
Yes.
And now, I mean, taking that into sort of say as into consideration, it's developing also very much into a startup location for many technological young startup companies and so forth. And as you've probably also heard, that the entire place around Siemensstadt in Spandau, that's supposed to be also be transformed into a hub for startups and so forth. So there's a lot of that going on too.
Yeah, it's really it's a really dynamic.
Very much so.
But also it's very livable. I love that. We shouldn't talk too much about it. We don't want to have oceans of people coming here. So another thing that you do, you do reviews of concerts.
Yes, I do.
I see you all the time at concerts.
Well, at mostly at opera.
Opera
yes,
performances.
Yes, I have 3 publications that I sort of say write for, and that was.
Do you want to name them or?
Bachtrack in the UK.
Well, one Bachtrack is an amazing group.
Yeah, that was that. They're quite active, and then O-Ton Online, which is a German paid publication which has been around for a long time. And whatever comes like this,
freelance,
I mean, yes.
That's excellent, because it's always a pleasure to see what performance is. And
we have the Bassariden coming up now.
Yes, I'll see you on Sunday.
Yes, exactly.
That'll be fun.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, is there anything else you'd like to share?
About Berlin per se, I think it's interesting that, and I think this goes again historically to the fact that it was built up as they had 13 train stations that started or ended here, depending on which way you look at it. And therefore, there's not really a center, but you have, and that was the beginning of all the various neighborhoods.
Right.
And I think that's also why Berlin has such a very strong emphasis on a neighborhood personality. Charlottenburg has its own personality, Kreuzberg, Schöneberg, Friedrichshain, they're all very different personalities and people that attract them. Prenzlauer Berg, which has now become, so to say, the hub for the young families. Charlottenburg has always been a little more staid and a little more the intellectual kind. And so
I'm glad we're the intellectual kind.
Yes. Friedenau, which is more artistic and so forth. So this is a very strong segment, and I think nowadays also the city itself is very interested in keeping it that way. I know that Berlin, Visit Berlin, which is the official tourism center. They also have guides to, for example, to all of the various Kiezes, and they have, the history and so forth that has taken place. So this is also very interesting in terms of, going and exploring.
This is one thing I love to do in Berlin, is just explore.
Absolutely.
I love to get on my bicycle and get lost.
Absolutely, yes.
Because you never really can get lost, but especially now with GPS and everything.
Yeah.
But it's just all of a sudden you find yourself in a completely different world.
Yeah.
I mean, you go out to, I can never say it, Neukölln?
Neukölln, yes.
And you go out there and all of a sudden you're in Grinzing in Vienna.
Yes.
Yes. Who knew?
Yeah.
These little villages out there, and we have a friend that has a sheep farm out there.
Really?
Yeah.
Amazing.
in the city of Berlin.
Yes.
And it's just, this is what the character of the city that's so interesting.
Exactly. And also it having so many waterways. I mean, they're the 2 rivers, and then they're connected with all the various canals and so forth. I mean, whenever I have visitors here, I always love to take them out on an excursion
river cruise,
on the river, or on one of the lakes, because it gives you a different perspective, and I mean, it has more waterways than Venice.
Right. Yes, people don't know that.
People don't know that, exactly.
But it's bigger. It's a larger land.
Much larger, yes, and it's nice and green too, so that there are many trees and so forth. So
it's a great place.
Yeah.
But back to the culture.
Back to the culture. Yes.
Yes, it's as you said. We have 3 opera houses that are world class, at least 5 world class orchestras.
Yes,
at least, and then so many musicians here collaborating and working together, and artists and filmmakers.
Yes.
You know, it's so dynamic and exciting.
Exactly.
And it's so great that you can contribute to it and be
Well,
part of it.
let's hope so.
Yeah,
Let's
well,
hope
you
so.
do,
Exactly.
and it's so exciting.
Yeah. Babelsberg is another place,
Oh, right,
Potsdam,
yeah,
and that
Potsdam,
whole
yeah.
Babelsberg, the Babelsberg Film Studios, which are being used for many international co-productions.
Yeah, now, yes.
So, you know.
Yeah, and then I have a friend from LA who comes and films in Babelsberg
There you are,
for
yes.
Showtime, you know,
Yeah.
and it's really exciting. And that was a film capital of
Yes.
Europe in the 20s and 30s.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, once you go into the whole film history, I mean, so many really innovative, also technical things took place here. And, you know, the Blue Angel and the first, the talkie films and all of that.
Metropolis.
Metropolis,
Yeah,
exactly. All of those things.
It's really
Yeah.
fun and exciting to be here.
Yeah.
And I really have enjoyed talking with you.
Well, thank you.
And I'm glad
sharing.
you shared so much with us. And it's delight to have neighbors like you.
Well, it's wonderful to be
Yeah,
here.
and it's always fun to have lunch and
Good.
see you. And I'll see you on Sunday.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay.
great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.